He had always felt like a shadow in someone else's light. Ethan was 21, a university student with quiet eyes and restless thoughts. Every time he opened his phone, he saw the shining lives of others. His classmates posted pictures of internships at prestigious companies, travels across Europe, smiling groups of friends at rooftop parties. Ethan scrolled silently, comparing each picture with his own life. The part-time job at a small cafe, the cramped apartment he could barely afford, the endless essays that felt like they led nowhere. He didn't hate them, but he hated himself for not being them. This poison of comparison seeped into every corner of his days. When a professor praised another student for an innovative idea, Ethan shrank into himself, convinced he would never be that clever. When a friend casually mentioned their upcoming trip abroad, Ethan laughed politely but later lay awake at night, wondering why his life always felt so small. One evening, walking home beneath the dim glow of street lamps, Ethan's chest tightened with a thought he had never spoken aloud. Maybe I am simply not enough. Maybe I will always be behind. That night, he dreamed of running. He ran on an endless track where others sped past him. Faster, stronger, more confident. He tried to catch up, but the harder he ran, the further behind he fell. He woke up with sweat on his skin and despair in his chest. The next morning, while serving coffee at the cafe, Ethan overheard a customer speaking with unusual warmth. The man was old, his hair silver, his posture slightly bent, but his voice carried calm strength. He was telling a younger companion, "The moment you compare your path to another's, you lose sight of your own feet. You stumble not because you are weak, but because you are looking in the wrong direction." Ethan froze. Those words pierced him deeper than any motivational video he had ever watched. After the customer left, Ethan wiped the table slowly, repeating the sentence in his mind. Lose sight of your own feet. Stumble not because you are weak, but because you are looking in the wrong direction. For the first time, he wondered, what if comparison was not truth but blindness? That evening, instead of scrolling through his phone, Ethan sat by his window, staring at the city lights. He whispered to himself, almost afraid of the sound, "If I stopped comparing, what would I see?" It was a fragile beginning, but something stirred in his chest. The beginning of a question, and maybe the beginning of a journey. He didn't plan to speak, but the question leaped out of him like a bird startled from a branch. The next morning, when the cafe bell chimed and the silver-haired customer returned, Ethan stepped from behind the counter with his heart thudding. He asked, with more courage than he felt, whether the man truly believed a person could stop comparing himself to everyone else. The stranger's eyes creased with a patient smile, the kind that suggested he had seen many storms and learned to drink the rain. The man introduced himself as Rowan Vale. He did not give a lecture, he offered a challenge. He slid a folded card across the table, edges softened by time. On the front, in small black letters, was a sentence that felt like a turning key. Walk without mirrors. Rowan explained gently that mirrors weren't only glass. They were also screens, rumors, trophies, and the glances people throw like coins. A mirror always shows you someone else's face in your own, he said. If you live in mirrors, you begin to live as a reflection. Ethan listened, half skeptical, half hungry. Rowan's challenge had 4 parts and 7 days. First, the social fast. For 1 week, no feeds, no scrolling, no vanity searches. He would move the apps into a hidden folder, log out, and, if necessary, borrow Rowan's ancient flip phone for emergencies. Comparison grows in silence made of glass, Rowan said. Break the glass. Second, the quiet ledger. Each evening, Ethan would write 3 wins, no matter how small. The rule was strict. Nothing about other people, only about his own feet. Brewed coffee without burning the milk. Finished paragraph 3 of the essay. Called his mother and listened more than he spoke. Your attention is the fuel of your life, Rowan said. Where you pour it, flowers grow. Third, the craft bench. For 70 minutes a day, no more, no less, he would build something that could be measured by effort, not applause. Could be a page of code, a sketch, a paragraph, a repaired chair leg. Output over outcome. Sweat over likes. Hands teach the heart who it is, Rowan murmured. Let your hands defend you. Fourth, the compass card. On a small index card, he would write 4 words, his own guiding values. Not borrowed slogans, not trending virtues. For words he wanted to become. He would carry the card in his pocket and touch it whenever he felt the tug of comparison. You cannot walk your path if you don't know its direction. Ethan felt the familiar itch to ask how long until he would feel different, as if transformation were a delivery he could track. Rowan only tapped the folded card. Begin, and the road will start to appear under your feet. Roads rarely appear for watchers. They appear for walkers. Day 1 felt like trying to breathe through cloth. Without the distraction of other lives, his own life made noise. He felt the weight of the essay deadline, the hollow spots in his friendships, the ache of not knowing what came after graduation. Twice his thumb drifted to the empty square where an app used to sit, an old ghost asking to be invited in. He chose the flip phone, and the ghost, insulted, went quiet. That evening, the quiet ledger fought him. His inner critic wanted grand victories, not small stitches. He wrote anyway, handwriting uncertain at first, then steady. Helped a tourist find the metro. Learned the name of the violin piece the cafe regular always hummed. Rewrote the essay's opening without flinching. On his walk home, the city seemed to exhale. He noticed the tired dignity of the street cleaner, the soft argument of pigeons over a crust, the way a neon sign blinked like a patient heartbeat. When another student swept past on a sleek bicycle, helmet glossy, laughter loud, the old ache rose, but softer now, like a tide that had farther to travel. Ethan slipped a hand into his pocket and pressed the compass card. The 4 words he had chosen, patience, integrity, curiosity, grit, warmed under his fingers like coals. At the end of the week, he would meet Rowan again and report. For now, the road was only 1 day long, and that was enough. He didn't feel victorious. He felt honest. It was a thinner feeling, and strangely, it held. Walk without mirrors, the card whispered from his pocket. For the first time in years, he looked down, not around, and watched his own feet move. The following week, Ethan found himself walking toward the small park where he had first overheard the old man's words. Something inside him told him that he would find the stranger again. And there he was, sitting on a weathered wooden bench beneath a tree, feeding breadcrumbs to the birds. The man looked up with calm, searching eyes. "Ah, the boy who listens," he said softly. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He wanted to ask so many things, but only one question came out. How do I stop comparing myself to everyone? The man smiled faintly, as if he had been waiting for that question. Come back tomorrow, he replied. Bring nothing but honesty. I will show you. The next day, Ethan returned. The man introduced himself as Mr. Armand, a retired teacher who now spent his days in the park. He handed Ethan a cracked pocket mirror. Look, he said. Ethan frowned but did as he was told. His own reflection stared back at him. Dark circles under tired eyes, lips pressed thin with self-criticism. Do you know why you suffer? Armand asked. Because you are staring into this mirror and wishing it would show another face. You want the reflection of your classmate, your friend, that stranger online. But this mirror will only ever give you one thing, yourself. If you reject that, you will always live in pain. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. But what if who I am isn't enough? Armand leaned closer. Enough for whom? For the world that constantly changes its standards. Or enough for the boy who looks back at you every morning. Tell me, Ethan, when will you give him peace? The question burned inside him. Ethan realized he had never thought of himself as someone deserving of peace. He had always imagined that happiness lived in someone else's body, someone else's story. Armand tapped the mirror. Every life has a different race. Imagine a sprinter comparing himself to a mountain climber. Imagine a pianist comparing himself to a swimmer. Foolish, isn't it? Yet that is what you do every day. You are not behind them, Ethan. You are only behind yourself because you refuse to walk your own path. Those words struck like thunder. Ethan gripped the mirror tightly, tears forming in his eyes. Armand placed a hand on his shoulder. You want to stop comparing? Then you must face the struggle within. You must see yourself clearly, not through the eyes of others. I will give you a challenge. For 7 days, you must write down 3 things each evening that belong only to you. Not achievements, not comparisons, just small truths of your own life. What you felt, what you tried, what you loved. At the end of 7 days, bring them to me. Then we will talk. Ethan nodded slowly. The challenge sounded simple, but he sensed its depth. That night, for the first time in years, he didn't scroll through his phone before bed. He sat at his desk, opened a blank notebook, and wrote, Day 1. I helped a customer at the cafe who dropped his coins. He smiled at me. I felt useful. Day 1. I walked home slowly and noticed the way the air smelled like rain. It was gentle. Day 1. I laughed at a silly video, and for a moment, I forgot to hate myself. When he finished, Ethan stared at the page. These weren't big victories, but they were his own steps, however small. For the first time, he felt the faint flicker of belonging to himself. The days that followed were not smooth. Ethan discovered that self-discovery was less like climbing a staircase and more like wandering through fog. Some nights, he sat before his notebook for long minutes, pen frozen in his hand, because his mind insisted nothing about his day was worth writing. That voice of comparison still whispered, What's the point? Other people are building empires, and you're writing about smelling the rain. But he remembered Mr. Armand's challenge. 3 truths, every day. So he forced himself to look closer, past the noise, into the small moments he would normally dismiss. On the second night, he wrote, Day 2. I brewed coffee at work and got the temperature exactly right. The customer said it tasted perfect. Day 2. I finally washed the pile of dishes in my sink. My room feels lighter. Day 2. I hummed an old song while walking, and it made me smile. By the 4th night, something curious began to happen. His entries grew gentler, more observant, less focused on outcomes. Day 4. I felt tired during class but stayed until the end. Day 4. I noticed a bird resting on the fence, its feathers shining gold in the sun. Day 4. I remembered a joke from childhood and laughed alone. The notebook was slowly becoming a mirror, but not the cruel mirror of comparison. This one reflected life in its quiet honesty. By the end of the week, Ethan had 7 pages filled with these fragments of self. When he returned to the park, his steps felt steadier. Mr. Armand waited on the same bench, the crumbs already scattered for the birds. Ethan handed him the notebook, unsure whether it held anything of value. The old man read silently, his expression calm, his fingers turning the pages with care. Finally, he closed it and placed it on Ethan's lap. Do you see what you have done? Ethan shook his head. You have begun to look inward. Each sentence says, I exist. Not I am better than them. Not I am worse than them. Simply I exist. That is the foundation of freedom. Ethan swallowed, his chest tightening. But the comparisons, they still come. They will, Armand replied. They are shadows. But shadows cannot choke you if you stand in your own light. These pages are your light. When the voice of comparison rises, return to this notebook. Remind yourself that your worth is not a race, but a rhythm. The words sank into Ethan like seeds into soil. He felt something shift, small but undeniable. A sense that maybe he didn't need to win against others. Maybe he just needed to walk with himself. Before leaving, Armand gave him a final instruction. Now that you have seen yourself, you must practice speaking to yourself as you would to a dear friend. For 7 more days, choose 1 sentence each morning. Say it aloud. Not about others, about you. Something kind. Something true. Ethan nodded, though the thought felt strange. He wasn't used to kindness directed inward. The next morning, standing before his bathroom mirror, he hesitated before whispering, I am learning. The words trembled at first, but as they left his lips, they echoed in a way he had never felt before. And so began the second phase of his awakening, learning to become his own companion instead of his own enemy. At first, speaking kindly to himself felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. Ethan would stand before the mirror, lips pressed tight, struggling to say even the simplest phrases. I am learning. I am trying. I am enough for this moment. Each sentence felt fragile, as though one gust of doubt could shatter it. But he kept going. Day after day, he whispered these words into his reflection. Sometimes he laughed awkwardly afterward. Sometimes he rolled his eyes. But sometimes, rarely quietly, the words seemed to sink in, leaving behind a warmth that lasted a few minutes longer each day. By the third morning, as sunlight slipped through his thin curtains, he said, I am allowed to move at my own pace. The moment those words left his mouth, a memory rose within him. He saw himself on the endless track of his dream, running until his lungs burned, always falling behind. For the first time, he realized maybe he had never been on the wrong path. Maybe he had only been running someone else's race. That thought carried him through the day. In class, when a fellow student announced they had just landed an internship at a major company, Ethan felt the familiar sting in his chest. The voice of comparison hissed, See, you'll never measure up. But he slipped a hand into his pocket and touched the compass card Rowan had once given him. Patience, integrity, curiosity, grit. He took a slow breath and whispered to himself, I am walking my path. The sting didn't disappear instantly, but it softened. And for the first time, Ethan didn't spiral into hours of self-hatred. That evening, he returned to his notebook and wrote, Today, I heard about someone else's success. My old self would have drowned in envy. Instead, I remembered my 4 words. I am still here, still moving. The next day, his sentence was, I am worthy of trying. He carried it with him like a secret thread woven through his hours. A week passed. By then, the practice no longer felt forced. The sentences had begun to shape the way he carried himself. His shoulders were less slumped, his voice less hesitant. Even customers at the cafe noticed. One woman smiled and said, You seem brighter lately. Ethan blinked, surprised, because for once he didn't think she was wrong. When he met Armand again at the park, the old man studied him with a knowing gaze. Tell me, Armand asked, what have you learned? Ethan thought carefully. That the voice I use on myself matters more than the voices around me. Armand's eyes glimmered. Good. You are beginning to hear your own song, and now you must play it loudly enough to guide your steps. Ethan frowned. How? Armand leaned back, watching the sky through branches. It is time for you to test what you've learned. The world will offer you mirrors again, many of them brighter and louder. You must walk among them without losing your reflection. That is your next challenge. Ethan felt both fear and determination rising inside him. The test meant he could fail, but it also meant he could prove, at least to himself, that he was changing. That night, he looked into the mirror once more and whispered, I am stronger than yesterday. This time, the words did not feel fragile. They felt like roots. The test awaited, though he did not yet know what form it would take. One Friday afternoon, Ethan's classmates gathered at the cafe after lectures. They filled the small space with chatter and laughter, their conversations sparkling with stories of summer plans, job interviews, and adventures abroad. Ethan served them coffee with practiced ease, but inside, the old ache stirred. Their voices carried the sound of lives rushing forward while his own steps felt painfully small. Then came the sharpest blow. His closest friend, Daniel, leaned across the table and announced with a grin, I just got the internship with the global firm I told you about. The group erupted in applause, claps on the back, congratulations ringing like bells. Ethan smiled weakly as he set down their drinks. But inside, the shadows of comparison rose in waves, hissing, You're falling behind again. Look at him. Look at them. You'll never catch up. For a moment, Ethan felt the ground slipping. He wanted to shrink into himself, to drown in the same despair that had haunted him for years. But then, like a faint thread of music cutting through the noise, he remembered the morning sentence he had whispered into the mirror. I am allowed to walk at my own pace. He pressed his hand against the compass card in his pocket. Patience, integrity, curiosity, grit. He took a slow breath. Instead of leaving, instead of pretending, He walked back to Daniel's table. His smile trembled, but his voice was steady. "Congratulations, man. You worked hard for this." Daniel's grin widened. "Thanks, Ethan. It means a lot." Ethan turned away, but something astonishing had happened. The sting of comparison didn't swallow him whole. Pricked, yes, but it faded quicker than ever before. He realized that acknowledging Daniel's success did not erase his own journey. For the first time, he felt the strange possibility that both could exist, Daniel's path and his own, without one canceling the other. That night, Ethan returned to the park. Mr. Armand was waiting, as though he had known. "Well?" the old man asked. Ethan sat beside him, his notebook clutched tightly. "It hurt. It really did. But I didn't collapse into it. I remembered my words. I congratulated him. And then I came here." Armand's smile was quiet but full of pride. "Good. That is the beginning of freedom. Do you know what you've done? You have walked past the mirror without bowing to it." Ethan let out a shaky laugh. "It still feels hard." "Of course," Armand said gently. "Transformation is not the absence of struggle. It is the courage to keep walking while the struggle whispers behind you." Ethan opened his notebook and wrote, "Today I faced the mirror. Today I walked past it." He closed the book, feeling a small flame inside his chest, steady and warm. But Armand wasn't finished. "There will be a greater test, Ethan. One that does not come from others, but from within. You must prepare to meet it." Ethan frowned. "Greater than comparison?" Armand's eyes darkened with gravity. "Yes, the test of believing you are truly enough, even when no one is watching." Ethan shivered at the thought, yet deep within, a new strength stirred. He was no longer the boy running on the endless track. He was beginning to walk his own road, step by step, shadow by shadow. The greater test arrived not in noise, but in silence. It was a Sunday morning, the cafe closed, the streets quiet. Ethan sat alone in his small apartment, sunlight leaking through half-drawn curtains. For once, there were no classmates around to compare himself to, no conversations about jobs or travels, no flashing screens filled with lives brighter than his own. There was only him, and that was where the unease began. He wandered the room restlessly, touching books he hadn't finished, glancing at essays half-written, staring at the mirror above the sink. Without anyone else to measure against, a harsher voice crept in. "You're not enough for yourself either. Look at you. Ordinary. Empty-handed. Nothing special." The weight of it pressed on him harder than the sting of comparison ever had. He realized this was the test Armand had spoken of. Not the challenge of seeing others succeed, but the challenge of facing himself when there was no audience, no distraction. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, hands trembling. For a long while, he did nothing, just listened to the voice grow louder. Then, almost by instinct, he reached for the notebook. He opened it, flipping past the pages filled with small truths, gentle victories, and kind sentences. His eyes landed on one line he had written days ago. "I am walking my path." He whispered it aloud. At first, it sounded hollow in the empty room. He said it again, louder this time, then again. The voice of doubt pushed back, but each repetition made Ethan's words feel sturdier, like a wall being rebuilt stone by stone. Finally, he stood, gripping the notebook against his chest. "I am enough for myself," he whispered. The sentence felt terrifying, too big, too bold, but it also felt alive. His chest tightened with something fierce, a truth he had never allowed himself to hold. Tears welled in his eyes, not from weakness, but from the strange release of carrying this burden for too long. For years, he had tried to measure his worth in reflections, in applause, in comparisons. But now, in a quiet room with no one watching, he had said it for himself. The silence softened. The sunlight seemed warmer. For the first time, Ethan felt what Armand had promised. Not victory over others, but peace with himself. That afternoon, he walked to the park. Armand was waiting as always, scattering crumbs for the birds. Ethan sat beside him, notebook in hand. "I think I faced it," he said quietly. Armand looked at him, eyes kind. And what did you learn? Ethan took a deep breath. That enough isn't something you find in others. It's something you give yourself. And I gave it. The old man nodded. Good. Then you are ready for the last step. Not just to walk without mirrors, but to walk with purpose. Ethan frowned. Purpose. Armand leaned closer, his voice almost a whisper. Comparison steals your peace. But without purpose, peace becomes an empty room. To live free, you must discover not only who you are, but what you are walking toward. Ethan's heart raced. The idea both frightened and excited him. For the first time in his life, the question wasn't who am I compared to them, but what is my path meant to be? The final chapter of his transformation was waiting. The question of purpose haunted Ethan for days. He carried it with him to the cafe, to the classroom, to his quiet walks home. No longer was he comparing his life to others. Instead, he was staring at the road ahead, wondering what it meant to walk it with intention. He returned to the park, notebook in hand, and found Armand waiting as though he had always known Ethan would come. Purpose? Ethan began. I don't know how to find it. What if I never do? Armand chuckled softly, shaking his head. Purpose is not a treasure buried in the ground, waiting to be dug up. It is a seed you plant with your own hands. It grows as you walk, not before. Those words rooted themselves deep in Ethan's heart. That night, instead of writing only his 3 daily truths, he added a new section to his notebook, Seeds of Purpose. On the first page he wrote, I feel alive when I help others. On the second, I lose myself in writing, even when no one reads it. On the third, I want to live gently, but with strength. Each day he added more seeds, small discoveries about what mattered to him. The notebook became less of a record of survival and more of a map of becoming. Weeks passed. The temptation to compare still rose now and then, like shadows at dusk, but Ethan had learned how to face them. He touched his compass card. He spoke his kind sentences. He returned to his truths, and each time the shadows faded faster. One evening, as spring bloomed in the city, Ethan closed the cafe and stepped outside. The air was warm, scented with flowers and faint traces of rain. He felt no urgency to rush home, no itch to check what others were doing. He simply walked, his feet steady, his chest light. For the first time in years, he realized he was no longer running on that endless track. He was walking a road of his own. He thought of Daniel and the others, their bright successes, their journeys that once pierced him with envy. Now he could wish them well sincerely, without feeling smaller himself. Their paths were theirs. His was his. When he met Armand again, he said, I think I understand now. It's not about being first. It's not about being the best. It's about being true. True to the path that is mine to walk. Armand's eyes softened with pride. Yes, boy, that is freedom. Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep within. He looked out at the park, at the people passing by, each lost in their own rhythm of life. For once, he didn't feel behind or beneath. He simply felt himself. That night, he wrote his final entry in the notebook for the season. Today, I walked without mirrors. Today, I belong to myself. And with that, Ethan's journey of transformation settled into a quiet truth. One of the greatest pains in life is comparison. But one of the greatest freedoms is choosing your own pace, your own road, your own song. He was not finished growing, no one ever is, but he had begun. And sometimes the beginning is the bravest step of all.